Ebon Venus. Let others boast of maidens fair, of eyes of blue and golden hair. My heart like needles ever true turns to the maid of ebon hue. I love her form of matchless grace, the dark brown beauty of her face, her lips that speak of love's delight, her eyes that gleam as stars at night. Over marble Venus let them rage, who sets the fashions of the age, each to his taste. But as for me, my Venus shall be ebony. Lewis Howard Latimer. Before we talk about Lewis Latimer and how he contributed to the electric light bulb and other inventions of that time, what we have to focus on is the history of why light bulbs are so important. This history is abandoned and usually not talked about, even though, in my opinion, it's the single most important history of all man. And it begins with darkness. In the beginning, there was day and night. Human beings were forced to sleep and wake up during the day. Now, some did sleep and wake at different parts of the day, but the most optimum time was the day. It was best built for hunting and everything else that humans do. Until the creation of fire. Human beings created two main ways of making fires, one using sparks, the other using friction in the form of sticks. These represented the Stone Age, and human beings lived in the Stone Age longer than they've lived in any other age. This was fantastic. You could now make your food with fire, cook with fire, see at night with fire, attack people with fire, attack animals with fire, protect yourself with fire, warm yourself in the cold with fire. This invention is probably top 5 inventions ever made by human beings. Its use is still completely usable today. Maybe not for light, but for really a lot of things. This would be more advanced in about 12,000 BC when lamps would be introduced. Some in Africa using palm oil, some in Asia, some in Europe using vegetable oils. All over the world, fire was being used in different ways. But then something changed. Electricity. Now, there's a myth going on that the light bulb was created by one person. This is stupid. The reason is because one person couldn't have created the light bulb. It's impossible. Lots of people added contributions to the light bulb. Now, of course, the first name that comes up when everybody speaks of the light bulb is Thomas Edison. But Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb either. In fact, we know if we just remove all the other inventors that came before him, we know that he didn't even work alone on his light bulb. We know he worked with a team. Now, why does this matter? Well, it's because people do not understand how invention works. People think that most inventions in history are one guy sitting down and coming up with the invention himself. Even though patents might show one person's name, this is not how it usually happens. This is where we insert people like Lewis Latimer. So, what happened? How does Lewis Latimer fit in to a picture where Thomas Edison supposedly invented a light bulb? Well, Thomas Edison, like I said, did not invent the light bulb. He was one of the few people who had a light bulb device at the time. In fact, his patent was disputed so much that he had to merge with a different company which had already invented a light bulb and was alleging that his ideas were stolen. Who was working in that company that they merged with? One Lewis Latimer. This Lewis Latimer person, who was working with this other person, contributed a lot to the light bulb. For example, he created a process of developing carbon. This would be very important for the filaments, and it would be important for other inventions that had to do with that other company, that had nothing to do with the light bulb, but had something to do with other inventions, which I'll mention later. Now, before I read his patent, I have to explain that some people like to downplay his contributions to the light bulb by saying that what he did was only manufacture and create a manufacturing machine and that's it. But he actually added different volumes or different textures of carbon, which one could be used in one texture as a carbon filament used for the light bulbs. But some people like to boil it down to he just did something where he just manufactured a machine so things could go faster, which was one of his contributions as shown in this patent that was granted to him. So we read United States Patent Office, Lewis H. Latimer of New York. Application titled February 19, 1881. Be it known that I, Lewis H. Latimer, of New York, in the country of New York and state of New York, have invented certain new and useful improvements in the manufacture of carbons for electric lamps, of which the following is a specification, reference being had to the drawings accompanying and forming a part thereof. My invention relates more particularly to the carbonizing and conductors of incandescent lamps, though it is equally applicable to the manufacture of delicate sheets or strips of dense and tough carbon, designed for any purpose whatever, and it consists in carbonizing blanks and forms of textile, fibrous, or other carbonizable material in protecting envelopes of a material whose rate of contraction when exposed to high temperature and under conditions which preclude the admission of air is the same or approximately the same as their own. In the method of carbonizing employed previous to my invention, the blanks cut from fibrous or textile materials were confined in grooves or laid between plates of metal or carbon and charred to prevent the strips from adhering to the plates. They were coated with graphite or laid between strips of thin tissue paper. When heated, the confining plates expand while the blinks between them contract very considerably under the intense heat of the furnace, so that many of them are broken and distorted consequence of their extremely delicate structure and their tendency to shift their position between the plates. This I avoid by the method I propose, and which is illustrated in the accompanying drawings, in which figure 1 illustrates the method of enclosing the blanks in the protective envelopes, sectional view. As you can see there, he is not just creating a machine to create these carbon filaments, but he is manufacturing a new version of these carbons themselves in how they are made so that they can be more useful for the light bulb. Hiram Maxer employed Lewis Latimer, and this is why Lewis Latimer had any care about light bulbs, because Hiram Maxer had as well contributed to the light bulb, and so did someone else in England called Joseph Swan. Well, Lewis Latimer actually went to England to work for one of these, and he worked for Hiram Maxim, and he was employed and did some stuff in New York and other places. Now, if we look here, we can see that he was a draftsman for this company. He was a researcher and a draftsman for this company, which would then transfer when he moved over to the Edison company into the Edison. But that's not it, because the Edison company merged with the Swan company. This means that he has worked with and for all of these three companies, which, by the way, were not all the companies that existed that had electric light bulbs, but all three of these companies contributed to electric light bulbs. In fact, you want to know how similar the patent is? Let's read Hiram Maxim's patent that had to do with the electric light bulb. We're going to read a very short part. Description: H.S. Maxim, manufacturer of filament for electric lamps. Specification: forming part of letters patent number 405170 dated June 11, 1889. Application filed Tannery 14, 1881. Patented in England February 15, 1881, number 639, and in Germany February 21, 1881. This invention relates to electric lamps of the class known as incandescent, in which the light-giving portion is a continuous conductor of high resistance, commonly of carbon. The object of the invention, hereinafter fully explained, is to provide a means of preparing these carbons whereby they may be made of a uniform standard illuminating power, by the modes hereafter generally practiced for the making of electric carbons. It is impossible to obtain any considerable number which, under a current of given intensity, will develop the same light, whether conductors are made out of carbon deposits formed on the interior of gas resistors, whether by shaping such carbon into the required form with cutting tools, or by grinding it up and then molding it into shape under pressure. It is practically impossible to secure two conductors having precisely the same radiation surface, or if this having the same resistance. The same difficulty attends the ordinary modes of manufacturing incandescent conductors by shaping a fibrous material into the desired form and then carbonizing it. By the standards of people who pretend that manufacturing carbon is not the same as creating a new form of this conductor, this should mean that he also didn't do that. But we know that this is one of the biggest rivals. In fact, he's one of the biggest rivals because he didn't join with Thomas Edison, whereas all the other guys did. But Lewis Latimer joined Thomas Edison by leaving this guy's company. Keep in mind that this manufacturer patent is from the same year as Lewis Latimer's one when he's working in the company. So And then you'll keep in mind that the manufacture developments that will happen under Thomas Edison will only happen when Lewis Latimer is in the company. The improvements that would be the same as the ones that Lewis Latimer added, but we'll look at that later. Lewis Latimer would then go to England and teach the process from head to toe, right? From glass blowing to suction of the air, removing the air, and applying the filament and all of that. He would teach that in England on the behalf of the Maxim company when he was in England. But he didn't just do this only. We know that there is a book that they wrote, Lewis Latimer and two other people, when they were in the Edison company, where they explain how the Edison light bulb works once they've made their improvements as well. Remember, patents are given to specific people, and so do not expect the patent to have Lewis Latimer's name or any of the other guys who contributed. But this book tells you that there are contributions that he made, and of course, he was a idea person and a draftsman and all of that in the company. In fact, he drafted most of the graphics for these companies and their patents because he was an expert drafter. We'll get back to that too. Lewis Latimer would also, in 1881, work with Joseph V. Nichols and improve the light bulb in another way using metals. As we read in this patent, electric lamp, right? As we read, description, J.V. Nichols and L.H. Latimer electric lamp number 247097, patented September 13, 1881. Joseph V. Nichols of Brooklyn and Louis H. Latimer of New York, New York, electric lamp. Specifications forming part of the letters patent N. To all whom it may concern. Be it known that we, Joseph V. Nichols, and resident of Brooklyn in the county of the Kings and state of New York, Louis H. Latimer, of the city, county, and state of New York, have invented certain new and useful improvements in incandescent light electric lamps to the metallic conducting wires of an incandescent lamp by our improved method, figure, a view of the same turned edgewise, perspective of the same illustration, more in detail, the connections are present, a carbon conducting strip made in the useful manner with widened ends. The strip is by preference prepared by carbonizing a blank cut from sheet of paper, the form of the blanks being approximately that of the finished carbon. This method is not essential, however, as others may be employed in the preparation of the carbons, as by bending and twisting straight strips of wood or paper either before or after carbonization. Though the ends, square or rectangular proportions, are out before carbonization, and through these proportions the flattened ends of the wires or conductors passed and bent over by pinchers to firmly clamp the carbon in order to secure a more perfect electrical contact between the carbons and the wires. The ends of the former may be previously coated with copper or platinum. With this form of clamp, all nuts, screws, or pincers, similar accessories are dispensed with. Now, we could keep going on over here, but we can see they invented a light bulb. Let's read the last part. The combination with a carbon conducting strip having widened proportions and rectangular perforations, conducting wires with flattened ends passing through the perforations and bent over into close union with the carbon as and for the purpose set forth in testimony whereof we have hereunto affixed our signature in the presence of two subscribing witnesses. And the two subscribing witnesses are W.M.H. Tucker and David Law. I don't know if I've fully explained now that Lewis Latimer didn't just manufacture some machine to create carbon, but was intimately involved in the creation of the light bulb, first as a competitor of Edison, but then as a merger with Edison. And so did Joseph Swan and others, because other companies were also taken in by Thomas Edison. Remember, I told you there was a book that was written by Lewis Latimer? Well, here it is. It's called Incandescent Electric Lighting. And here it shows several things, including the Edison light bulb. So let's read it. Incandescent lighting, electric lighting, a practical description of the Edison system by L.H. Latimer, to which is added the design and operation of incandescent stations by C.J. Field, and a paper on the maximum efficiency of incandescent lamps by John W. Howell. You can see, so Incandescent Electric Lighting by L.H. Latimer. And at the time when the first edition of this little volume issued from the press, Electric Lighting by Incandescent had barely got beyond the stage of the laboratory experiment, and the possibility of lighting large districts from a central station as successfully as with gas was doubted by men who now stand high in electric circles. So great indeed has been the change in this art since that time that we are rapidly becoming possessed of the indifference consequent upon familiarity, and take the introduction of the electric light into our factories, business places, and dwellings as a matter of course. There is, however, one phase of this industry which is rapidly placing even a general knowledge of the means by which the electric current is generated and distributed beyond the reach of all but those actually connected with it as a business, or the student who proposes to follow it as a profession. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole book, but the first part of the book, or the first book, is by Lewis H. Latimer. The second part is by Field, and then the third one is by John White. And basically, they go into detail about electricity and light and all kinds of things that have to do with electrical systems. So this idea that Latimer was this guy who built, it's just bunk. Now that was just a taste of his contributions in electric stuff. It was just a taste, but we have to move on because we can't just keep talking about the light bulb, because he was also involved in the telephone.
You are my heart, Alexander Graham Bell.
Lewis Latimer, before he worked in light bulbs, worked first as an assistant for Alexander Graham Bell and drafted the blueprints for the patent of the telephone, in which the patent was accepted by these blueprints that were drafted by Lewis Latimer. Now, this is what you call double trouble. First, big involvement in light bulbs, and then secondly, big involvement in the telephone. Not a small feat at all. In a couple of images that are very interesting, you find 28 chosen people by Thomas Edison who had worked very closely with Thomas Edison. You could find people in there like Charles L. Edgar, Edward T. Greenfield, William Joseph Hammer, and one Lewis Howard Latimer.